A new book is out in the United States, and it's called We Are Not Numbers, The Voices of Gaza's Youth, co-edited by Ahmed Al-Nouk and Pam Bailey, and part of the project We Are Not Numbers that was founded in 2014 to give voice to young people in Gaza. Pam Bailey is joining us today to discuss this project and this book. We encouraged Pam over the last several months that people go and buy Rifat Al-Harir's book, If I Must Die, not just because it was a terrific collection of poetry, prose, and interviews, but also as an act of resistance to annihilation. That the very act of reading the poetry, of reading these stories, is a way to stand against the elimination of a people. And I would encourage everybody to do the same with We Are Not Numbers, let's back up. Tell us about the project We Are Not Numbers. First of all, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, it was We Are Not Numbers. I founded it right in the aftermath of the 2014 Israeli war on Gaza, which at the time I thought would be like the worst in history. I could never imagine at the time that we'd be going through something like this. But it was the worst of the wars at that point in time. And I was living in Gaza at the time, and I met this young man. I had met this young man in Gaza at a party, and I sort of followed up with him on Facebook. I noticed that his Facebook profile had gone dark. He wasn't posting like he usually did. He was a prolific poster. And so I just reached out to him and said, how are you? And he said, fine. And I said, no, tell me something real. Clearly something's wrong. And it turned out his elder brother, who he idolized, had been killed, had been murdered in that war. And because I'm a writer by background, and because I knew that he had been struggling to improve his English, instead of avoiding the topic like people tend to do when a tragedy happens, I leaned into it. And I encouraged him to write a story about his brother to honor him, honor his memory, and help other people know who he really was. And so over the course of like 3 months, we passed this story back and forth. The young man is Ahmed, who now heads the project. And what was really, really important, and I think what this whole book tries to do is that I learned in the course of that essay that he wrote that his brother had been killed because he was a member of the resistance. He was, and he was afraid to tell me that at first. He assumed that once I knew that, I would no longer feel sympathy with his brother. But of course that wasn't true, because by the time he told me that, he had told me all about his brother growing up, and I knew what kind of a kid he was. I knew what kind of what was going on in the life of the family, what he endured, what he saw that no child should ever see. And I realized, that's the story we don't hear here. We still don't hear here, right? We hear about Hamas and the people who fight for Hamas, and we think of them as terrorists. We don't think of them as humans, as individuals with stories. And we don't think about, why did they get to the point where they felt like they had to do that? Same with October 7th. We don't question, too many people don't question about why did that happen? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. People don't get to that point in a vacuum. And so I realized we have an important story, and I tried to get it published. It was the first time that a resistance fighter had been depicted as just an ordinary person. And also at the same time, Ahmed came out of his depression. What's interesting is at that time too, he was thinking that he should join the resistance, that he should become a fighter. He saw no other future for him. All he saw was a bleak future. So the act of writing and telling the story and actually seeing it get published convinced him that perhaps there was another way to resist. Now, what breaks my heart today is that, so I really did think when I started the project that, this would give young writers, young people another way to resist and express themselves. And I thought it might make a difference. When I went through all the stories that we had mentored over the years since the project got started in 2015, I just cried, because you look at where we're at today. And I felt like I'd broken a promise to them. I told them that this could make a difference. This is another way. And if, this war, what we're going through now is worse, so much worse. And all the, yeah, so it's a heartbreak for me. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, even what you just explained was not a conversation. I mean, in many corners of the American media, it's still not a conversation that you're allowed to have. You can't talk about people who commit acts of terrorism as human beings. Even if we take like the most hardened, reprehensible terrorist, asking questions about how they got from point A to point B, from being a baby to point B, is forbidden. You're absolutely not allowed to have that conversation because you get lumped into a category as empathizing with acts of terrorism itself. So, Pam, can you tell us a little bit about when you spend time actually diving into these stories, what patterns maybe emerge? What are people missing by not digging into those particular stories?
And I think what makes this book unique, there's been a lot of books about Gaza and Palestine that come out recently, which is wonderful to see. But what makes this book unique is that it's a collection of very real stories. These are not professional writers, which is the beauty of it, I think. Very real snippets of, vignettes of life in Gaza over 10 years. And this book answers the question why October 7th happened. Because if you look, going back from 2015, month after month, year after year, not only were there constant attacks in terms of Israeli forces, coming in every year, we just didn't hear about it all the time. But it's the everyday structural violence, the lack of water, just potable water, the astronomically high unemployment rate. Youth, they have a very high rate of education there. They go through college and everything, and then they come out to no hope of a job. They can't leave, Gaza to pursue that. They can't even travel for a vacation. So it's like that's what I think comes out of the book, and the lesson I want people to take. It was a grinding oppression in both the big ways, the attacks, and the small ways, every day, 24/7 for, in this case, was 10 years. You can't go through that kind of oppression and not have something happen. And then the other thing is that, they also write about all the forms of nonviolent resistance that they tried. There's a number of stories. You'll probably remember there was the Great March of Return. There was a nonviolent protest along the border with Israel. They called it for return because it was like their desire to go back to their original land that they'd been kicked off of. But it was nonviolent, and they write about all the other ways they've gone to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. They've really tried everything, and it didn't work. And to me, the sad part is, I also want everybody to take home from this, is that the only time they got attention, serious attention, is when there was violence. I mean, if we didn't want this to happen, if we didn't want October 7th to happen, then the international community should have responded and heard them when all those other things were going on. If you don't want people to resist, then show them that some other technique works. When people have no future, when they can't even envision themselves living past the age of 30, what do you think? Some people are going to react, and this is true in our own country. Look at the American Revolution. This is not a nonviolent country, But yeah, so I think, and the other thing I think is, I hope people get from the book is that you also have glimpses of just ordinary kids struggling with weight and with migraines and going to the beach, woven in all the tragedy, is everyday life. And you start to recognize that there's no difference between them and us.
Yeah. And to the point about nonviolence, the Palestinian Authority, with the PLO put down arms and entered into negotiations with Israel in the hopes that it would lead to some two-state solution and a slowdown in settlements. Instead, the settlements expanded, and just this last week, the U.S. even said that members of the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Palestinian Authority, would be denied the opportunity to even travel to New York to attend the United Nations upcoming assembly, which when the U.S. agreed to take the United Nations, or asked if it could host the United Nations, one of the deals was, we are going to allow even our worst enemies to come here to New York Doesn't mean they can go around the entire country, but they can come to New York and they can go to the UN, because it would give us an immense amount of power. We're going to have the UN, and we can just keep people out of the country and not let them attend the United Nations. And the one group of people we do that to is the officials with the Palestinian Authority, who, did everything that they were supposed to do, but lay down their arms, enter negotiations, and so on. I'm curious for what you've been hearing about this, because there's a paradox at play in the sense that October 7th led to where we are today, which is utter, absolute, catastrophic annihilation of Gaza. On the other hand, a lot of people who, like you said, committed to nonviolent forms of resistance over the last decades have told me they question that decision. And I say it's a paradox because the violent path led to this utter, complete catastrophe. Yet, still, internally they're feeling like, well, perhaps that was all there was. So how are the people that you're talking to sorting through that question?
Well, there's sort of I guess, a split between the activist community outside and our Gazan writers who are still trapped there. At this point, the people in Gaza, they just want it all to stop. What breaks my heart is that this is a very proud people who, rightfully so, are very proud of their culture. And they're reduced to the point now of being willing to accept anything. You want them to all leave and go to Uganda, then okay, then we will, but just stop the killing. Stop the killing. And they're reduced to that. And the conundrum here is, like, from the outside, from an activist point of view, I mean, of course, this is probably the point in time that we've seen the largest growth in supporters of Gaza and Palestine. I mean, there's a huge change. I mean, to see even the number of Democrats we have in Congress, proposing a bill to stop arms sales to Israel is, we've never been there before. And isn't it a shame that this is what it took? This really is what it took? Where were they when, all those years of just, like, not being able to live, I mean, not having power. I mean, when I lived there, we had electricity for 3 hours a day, every day. Americans complain if they're without a power for like a couple of days. I mean, I often say, you put an American over there for, say, I give them 3 months, some of them will be throwing rockets.
Yes.
I mean, some of them will. That this is human nature. That's how we respond to oppression. So it's a little bit. It's to me, I have this sort of like dueling thing. Is like we've gotten the cause for Palestine to a point that, in terms of broad base of public support, and even some politicians who are always way behind is at a point we've never been before. But this is what it took.
A little bit of a follow-up on Ryan's question. It was less than a year ago, we were being told by Anthony Blinken that Hamas had already reconstituted, and we know this, in different parts of Gaza. And the entire purpose of the war, from Netanyahu's perspective, was to return the hostages and eradicate Hamas. Does any of what's happened over the course of the last several years, has that made Hamas, from your perspective, having talked to people in these places, has this fueled what future violent conflicts? Has this made them more powerful, less powerful? Is this going to create a generation of Gazans who are more attracted to the cause of Hamas? What do you make of what happens now?
I think there's a mistake in focusing on Hamas. We should talk about the resistance. Because one thing that was really important that was said earlier is that I don't believe it's really about Hamas at all. Israel has never supported any Palestinian movement that had any kind of power. They were against Yasser Arafat. They actually helped create Hamas in the very beginning as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority. They will not like anybody who is in power over the Palestinians that they don't control. So I don't think this is about Hamas at all. And the question should be not so much whether Hamas will continue, but will the resistance continue? And I believe that despite the fact that you do have the people overall are at a point now when many of them would just give everything up, the resistance will come back. You can pound it for a while into the underground, into submission, but it will come back. I mean, that's what history, I think, has shown us. You tell me one country where you haven't, had this kind of oppression and resistance totally went away. It doesn't happen.
Anything else you'd like to say about the book before we wrap?
I mean, I do think that what you said earlier, but buying this book is an act of resistance that Americans can do. What's going on in the U.S. with his President Trump's latest action, suspending or threatening not to give visas to anybody, the Palestinian passport holder, is trying to keep this narrative from coming out. So one way you can fight those kinds of actions is to buy the book and give it to people, talk about it. And again, what I think is really important about this book is there's a few Palestinians that have become like really prominent, but there are so many more. That talent is so broad. And that's what to me is also the beauty of the book. It's not just one person who manages somehow to get above the fray and get like in the New Yorker or whatever all the time. There's all these others, invisible Palestinians. And this book is a collection of those stories. Yeah. They're equally important. So I would say, please buy it, because if we can make it a bestseller in the US, that sort of sends a message to the administration. No, we want to hear these voices and we value them. And it sends a message to the writers too. It tells them that we're hearing you. We can't control our government, but we are hearing you. And we value your voices.
And I think people will also want to know where the proceeds are going.
It's all going to We Are Not Numbers.
Right.
It goes to the project, and we're desperately trying to help I'd say about half of our writers are still there, and we're really trying to help them. It's difficult to get money in right now. You have these sort of vultures that take half of
or more. Money. No, I can confirm that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we're trying desperately to support them, and any money we get from the book is going to help do that.
Yeah, great. Well, Pam Bailey, thank you so much for taking the time, and best of luck on the rollout of the book.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.